Okay, I am going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everyone, to Compounding Happiness. I'm beyond excited for today's guest because he's actually lived out a childhood dream of mine. And I get to sit down today with someone who's the best in the world at what they do. And it's not often that you get to say that. My guest is a retired Navy SEAL, part of one of the most elite, badass groups on the planet. So being able to sit down with him today is going to be so fun. You're going to learn a lot, and just get ready for some heavy note taking. It's going to be great. Please welcome my guest, Rich. Rich, thanks for being here, man.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. So I want to get into your new book, The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers for Optimal Performance. But before that, I think that it would be a disservice because, as I mentioned, it seems like every little boy, every American boy has this dream of being a Navy SEAL once they find out what that is. It's kind of notorious for being one of the most, in my opinion, badass professions on the planet. And so take us back 20 years or so. What made you decide to enlist and go the route of I want to be a SEAL, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what's interesting is 20 years ago, that desire didn't exist because so few people knew what Navy SEALs were. I mean, I didn't find out about SEALs. I grew up wanting to be a Navy pilot. My twin brother and I loved flying. My dad was a private pilot, so we'd go flying all the time. And so we were like, hey, we want to be jet pilots. And of course, the Navy guys landed on ships. So we're like, oh, that's pretty badass. Let's do that, And so since we were little kids, we wanted to be Navy pilots. And it was only around 1990-ish when the Gulf War happened. And I found an article in Newsweek magazine that kind of highlighted all of the Spec Ops units, and SEALs were one of those units. But I found out about the SEALs, and I started reading about them and and learning about them. Man, these guys do everything. They're in the jungle, they're in the desert, they're underwater, they're skydiving. I love the water. I mean, I just, for me, the water was everything, and that was really cool to me. And so ultimately I said, oh, I'm going to try to do that instead. I didn't want to be a pilot and wonder if I could be a SEAL. But back then, I mean, it was, very few people knew what Navy SEALs were. It was very surreal for us, those of us who joined prior to 9/11 and, of course, prior to the incredible upswing in popularity and even just notoriety of the teams, to be witness to that and to be a part of it during that. So I think ultimately I love the idea of being kind of this invisible Spec Ops guy, warrior who kind of snuck around and did things without anybody ever knowing it. That's what back then, I don't know if you've ever seen this, it might predate you, but back then there was a commercial it was probably the mid to late 90s, maybe early 2000s. I think Spike Lee directed it. Okay. But it was a commercial, and it was basically all it showed was a beach. It was a beach at night, and there was waves crashing on the beach. And then the screen went black, and then it showed the beach again, and all it showed was footprints in the sand. And then the waves crashed over the footprints, and the footprints disappeared. And then it just said U.S. Navy SEALs. Right. That was the commercial. And I was like, I remember seeing that. I was like, that is exactly what I want to. I mean, and guys in my time frame all loved that commercial because it was kind of like invisible, right?
Yeah,
they just disappear like ghosts. And that is not certainly the image of the SEALs today. And there's nothing wrong. I mean, the image changes, of course, but that's why I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to kind of be invisible, be a ghost, and. And so, I joined up in 96 and went through training, and really because of 9/11 it was a very kinetic career. I mean, I retired end of 2016, early 2017 was the career. So I'm very grateful to have done it.
Yeah. One thing that I've noticed a lot and I've talked about is how ego can drive us to perform both like at really high standards, and also that shouldn't be the main driver. How much of a factor was ego for you in joining the SEALs?
Yeah, it's so I love semantics. Okay, so I try to separate meanings of words, and I don't know if I'd call it ego. I talk about narcissism in the book as an attribute, and I think narcissism is one of those things that probably sets in. So ego is really just sense of self. I think if you really break it down, Ego is, I am me, right? And it can be, you can have a really big ego, or you can have a small ego. I mean, it's just, that's what it is. You start getting into arrogance, which is where you start having a big ego or thinking you're better than other people, or like deep humility, which is, okay, I'm very comfortable with myself and I can learn. I think narcissism is this idea. It's the desire to stand out, to be recognized, to be special, to be adored in some way. Every human being on some level at some point wants to be that, right? Wants to stand out, because it's a biological thing, right? When we're getting paid attention to by our parents as infants, we are getting bursts of two neurotransmitters and one hormone. We're getting dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that says, "Hey, this feels good, keep doing it." Right, really powerful one. We're getting serotonin, which is another neurotransmitter, which is kind of this feeling of safety and comfort and bonding and connection. And then oxytocin, which is a hormone, which is known as the love hormone. It's a bonding connection hormone. We're getting all three of those. It's a very powerful feeling, and it feels great. And we're getting that even when we're infants. Well, we get that too when we're adults, when we're paid attention to. And all of us like that feeling. All of us seek and desire that feeling on some level. Okay. When I think about why I wanted to be a SEAL, and kind of as you described, why a lot of little boys want to be SEALs, right? I was a 22-year-old kid, and I wanted to be a badass. I mean, I was patriot. I was a patriot, and I wanted to serve my country, but I wanted to see if I could do something that very few people could do. Could I do it, right? Could I be this badass ghost?
Yep.
That's a little bit of narcissism talking, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? So narcissism as a driver, which is how I talk about it in the book, does exist, and what we need to do is recognize it, because that's how people are able to set audacious, over-the-top goals, right? I mean, how can so I'm a huge Metallica fan. How can James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich and Kurt have created Metallica without having that audacious goal, right? I mean, they just, or any actor or surgeon or anybody who's the top of their game, there's that start. So it exists. It certainly is a personality disorder if it's too much, right? Only about 1% of people of the population have it, right? But there are people who are close to it. And the inoculation is to surround ourselves with trusted, loving people who tell us the truth and rein us in when we're starting to get a little bit out over our skis, right? Our grounding wires is what I call them, right? My wife has been my grounding wire for 20 years, right? She's someone, my teammates could do this for me, right? Just bring me in, right? So that we manage it, but you can use it as a driver, just like you say.
Definitely. I think I loved that chapter in the book where you're talking about narcissism. And one thing that I noticed throughout every chapter is these attributes aren't inherently good or bad. And I've talked about that before. It's like they can just be signposts, and it's how you use them and the quantities that they exist. So I love that. And I want to get into that in just a little bit. But another question, and this is just my nerdy self geeking out because I gave a presentation on Hell Week in high school, and I've always been just obsessed with that of, this is arguably one of the most, if not the most difficult physically, mentally, emotionally trainings that you can go through. So do you mind just walking us briefly through what Hell Week is and how you managed to get through that?
Yeah. I'll answer the second part first. The answer is step by step, right? But the first part, Hell Week. So for your listeners, BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL Training, is the kind of the 6-month selection and training course that it takes a sailor, officer enlisted, to basically start at the beginning, and then when they go through it, they are SEALs, right? And it's known as some of the most difficult training on the planet. The crucible of the whole 6 months is tough, but the crucible is the 5th week, called Hell Week. Okay. And that's where you get most of your people quitting. In fact, typically, if you complete Hell Week after the 5th week, you have very few people, if any, quitting after that, right? Some guys get dropped because of injury, but I don't think, I'd have to ask that. I mean, there's probably maybe a handful of cases where guys actually quit after Hell Week. It just doesn't happen. So Hell Week is the kind of the crucible. In Hell Week, you start on Sunday afternoon, when they basically break you out of your tents at like 2 or 3 o'clock or maybe even 5 o'clock on a Sunday. And then you go until Friday, the end of that week, the following Friday. And during that whole entire week, you sleep for maybe 2.5 hours for the entire week. And the whole time you're running with boats on your heads, where you have pellet telephone poles, you're PTing, you're freezing in the surf zone, you're wet, you're sandy, you're cold, you're tired. It's just insane, right? I mean, the whole thing's pretty much a blur. I mean, you can't. I can remember pieces of Hell Week, like some moments. In fact, after I was a SEAL for quite a while, I went back for my centennial class. So you have Bud's class numbers, and mine was 210, and I went back for 310s Hell Week, and so I was able to watch them in some of their Hell Week, and just watching some of the things brought back the memory, right? Because I had forgotten it, right?
You probably suppressed that. You're like, I don't need to relive that.
Well, yeah, or it's just you're so tired. I mean, mentally, our brains stop functioning properly when you're that sleep deprived. I mean, that's just what happens. So whether I don't think it probably wasn't necessarily trauma or blocking out trauma as much as it was my brain just wasn't working properly, right? So. But yeah, so you go through that, and how do you go through that? I mean, you have to take it step by step. I mean, you can't. There's kind of a truism that's known in SEAL training, and that is, if you think about Friday on Monday, you're never going to make it, right? Because it's way too big, it's way too long, it's way too much, right? And so you have to take it step by step, and you have to modulate that, because some people say, hey, just make it to the next meal, whatever. Sometimes that's too long too. The next meal is too far away, right? It's like make it to the next evolution, or make it to the next push-up, or make it to the next minute, right? And you begin to learn how to effectively chunk your environment out, so that you can step through challenge, uncertainty, and stress. And what's kind of the unconscious genius of all that is that that's exactly what you need to make it through combat situations a lot of times. It's exactly what you need to make it through most highly challenging or stressful situations in life, is the ability to just take it one bite at a time. Because if you look at it because oftentimes the outcome, the resolution, the happy ending is way, way out of sight. It's way too far down the path. And it's way too dark in the moment to even consider that. And so you shouldn't focus on that because it's too far away. You just need to step through. And that's what you do, and that's what you learn to do in Hell Week.
Just taking everything one step at a time. One thing that I've noticed, anyone I've talked to or any book that I've read, is it's almost 100% a mental game. The physical has a way of just stripping away. You can have the best athlete in the world, but if the mental fortitude's not there, good.
Well, you're absolutely right, and it was common that you'd get super athletes in there, and they'd quit. And there's no bust on them. It's just because I think, and I'd have to talk to them to actually get this from them, but I would imagine it's because when you grow up in that environment of athleticism to that degree, you become very used to performing when you're at your best. Because that's what athletics is, right? Athletics, by definition, is how can I perform when I'm at my best? That's what you have to do. SEAL training is the polar and direct opposite of that. How do you perform when you are at your worst? Because a lot of times combat will put you at your worst. So we're going to get you down to zero, and then take you sub-zero and see what you have. And one of the things I loved about it, right, was the purity of the system, right? Because you show up on the beaches of Buds, and it doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter whether you were the smartest guy in your class, or the top athlete, or the kid from the farm, or the city, or the wrestler, or the whatever, or the guy chucking hay bales, right? All it says is, hey, here's the environment. We're taking it down to zero. What are you going to do, right? And that's the crucible. It's very pure. One of the purest things I think out there, to be honest with you.
I love that. And you said something I want to dive a little bit deeper on, this theme that is prevalent in the book of optimal performance versus peak performance. And you just said a lot of athletes tend to train for peak performance. They're training for a game or a match or 2 minutes on the wrestling mat. Whereas for a SEAL, it's when everything goes to shit. What are you made of? What's the difference between peak performance and optimal performance?
Right. Well, so peak is an apex, and you can only come down from an apex. That's all you can do, right? So it's the tippy top. There's no place that's going to go other than that, right? So athletes, of course, they have to train to peak. Okay, that's what the pro football player plans his entire week so that he can peak for 3 hours on Sunday. The Olympic athlete spends 4 years planning to peak for that moment in the games, right? There's nothing wrong with that, and in fact, you can apply that to a lot of other situations. The business person giving that sales presentation that's key, or you name it, preparing for a speech or whatever it is, The problem is when, and what I've seen actually recently is this kind of obsession with peaking as much as possible, or peaking all the time. I want to just peak on demand or peak on, peak in the moment, or whatever, or peak all the time as much as possible. And it's just not realistic. Okay, it's not realistic, nor is it healthy. And and seals don't operate that way. By the way, seals, we as an organization and really as a job have to be prepared to perform no matter what the situation looks like, no matter how we feel, no matter what it looks like. Okay, oftentimes we'd finish a mission and we're like, well, boy, that was really ugly, but we got the mission accomplished, right?
Yep.
So it wasn't
celebrate
pretty,
what you can.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't pretty, but we got it done, right? I mean,
Yep.
and so optimal performance is really about how can we do the very best we can in the moment, whatever the best looks like in the moment, right? Sometimes the best looks like peak. It looks like flow states and everything's clicking and cool. Other times, your best is like, hey, all I got is I'm taking step by step. This is Hell Week, okay? There was nothing peak about our performance in Hell Week, right? There was nothing. But let's take it out of Hell Week. Let's take it into 2020, okay, and COVID and everything that happened. When we all woke up one morning in March, and suddenly we're quarantined, okay, and this pandemic was hitting us, and none of us knew what the hell was going on, right? We're all thrown into uncertainty, challenge, and stress. Very few of us would say that we were peaking in that moment, right?
Yep.
We were all doing the very best we could, and for a lot of us, that didn't look very pretty. It was just like, hey, I'm just taking this step by step. So
making it
so
through.
optimal performance. That's right. Optimal performance allows us to modulate in a healthy, responsible way. Because guess what? When I'm driving to the grocery store, I don't have to be peaking. Okay, I just don't, right? So I can modulate my performance so that when I need to peak, I peak, and I can plan and prepare for that. But other than that, I can actually take comfort in the fact that no matter what it looks like, no matter how the environment is deteriorating, I will still perform. Whatever that looks like.
Do you think that's maybe one of the reasons why social media can be so harmful? Is it's just constantly showing people's peak performances and never the lows? I was just thinking about that. It seems like social media is kind of this breeding ground of only showing your peak performance, and then if you're not always peaking, crap. Now what am I doing?
You are so right, and I think what social media has done is it's almost taken the movie syndrome and put it into an everyday, right? Because when we watch movies, so let's just take a SEAL movie, for example, okay? SEAL movies are highly unrealistic, okay? And why is that? It's not so much because what they're showing you is not what Navy SEALs do. What they're showing you are the highs, are like the best parts, and everything goes like perfectly, right? And so if you and I, the way I could describe this, if you and I experience. So you and I go on a mission together, a SEAL mission, okay? And that mission, that mission is it's 8 hours long, and it's going to be a series of ups and downs, okay? It's an 8 hour long mission, and during that mission, we do what we need to do, blah blah blah. Maybe we get no gunfight here and there, okay? If we wanted to then make a movie or tell a story about that mission, okay, what we would then do is we'd take that sine wave and we'd clip the tops and the bottoms, okay, and we say, okay, we're just as this, and we'd crunch it, okay, and that story would become say a 30-minute explanation that only hit the highs, the very highs, and the very lows. That's what it is. That's what movies do, okay? Movies basically take that, and then they dramatize everything, right? So it's like it's hyper unrealistic because it doesn't stretch it out. It doesn't show the boring parts and all the stuff in between. I think social media has done that for life, because what social media does is it says, okay, I'm gonna basically show you this pinhole of what I look like and what my life looks like, okay, and that's what you're going to see, and this is and that's then what you can assume about my life, okay, but you're missing the whole window, right? I mean, there's nothing, that's the problem with social media, is because people start focusing on these pinholes, they're focusing on these highs. And then they're judging their own lives based on whether or not they're, sunning themselves in a bikini, 8 hours a day, right, with a margarita. So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I mean, sunning myself with a margarita every day would be pretty glamorous, not going to lie.
So would it, though? I would imagine if we ask ourselves that question.
Miserable.
It'd be miserable, right? I mean, yeah.
No,
yeah, yeah. But that's what people forget, right? They forget that, hey, life, the juice of life, are the ups and downs. I mean, that's the juice. I always say, like, people who love roller coasters, how many of you, so we're always trying to make our lives as calm and as even and as non-risky as possible, right? We're trying to take that sine wave that is life, and we're trying to kind of flatten it as much as possible, right? But I would always ask, if anybody who loves roller coasters, how many of you, or they try to make their life I just want to go up. I just want to. How many of you would like to ride a roller coaster that only went up or only stayed flat? Okay, that's not exciting, right? Exciting is the curves and the ups and downs and all that stuff. Well, we can say the same thing about life. Now, admittedly, there are some lows that are horrible. Okay, so I'm not saying that everybody should be, find joy in their trauma. Okay, there's some bad stuff that happens to people, but we can certainly try our best to learn from it. And those of us who don't have as much trauma, we're lucky not to have that trauma injected into our lives without our control. We can certainly throw ourselves into some discomfort once in a while just to learn and grow and enjoy the spice of life.
You just said something that I noticed right off of the bat in your book. You went out of your way to intentionally subject yourself to moments that you weren't comfortable in. You were in, what was it, Scotland? Is that where you were at? Were you learning to drive, like you've driven stick your whole life and then driving on the other side. So just you mentioned so many examples of intentionally putting yourself into these situations just to be uncomfortable. So how important is being uncomfortable and putting yourself into uncertain situations? How essential is that to growth and, some of those lower scoring attributes?
Yeah, well, so growth by definition takes somewhat of a tearing process, of a destructive process. I mean, let's just look when we go to the gym. Okay, we lift a weight. We are literally tearing our muscles apart. Okay, that's what's happening. Okay, and then we recover, and the muscles grow, and they grow bigger. All right. If we want to start exploring our potential as human beings, and again, potential by definition is always ahead of us. Okay, we never actually reach it; it's always ahead of us. Okay, it's potential is what could be; it's not what is.
Yep.
If we always want to explore what could be, then we have to be willing to walk to what I call our edges. Okay, the edges of what of our comfort zone. Okay, and then from that edge, start looking to the next edge and walk out to that next edge. Every time we walk out to an edge, it's putting ourselves into uncomfortable situations, oftentimes scary or whatever. But what that allows us to do is allows us to get to that edge or that horizon, because once you get to that horizon, what happens? The next horizon shows up, right? And then you get to walk to the next horizon. So if you want to grow as a human being, it is essential that you explore your own edges. And to explore your own edges, you must start to at least inflict a little bit of discomfort and uncertainty and challenge.
One of the podcasts that I released probably 3 or 4 weeks ago was just titled "Do Hard Shit," because I found myself getting comfortable. And like as you said, it's nice in theory to, just be coasting through and doing that, but it gets boring. And if you aren't subjecting yourself to doing difficult tasks, like where's the reward in that?
Right. Yeah, and just remember, I mean, you have to. The recovery process is huge, right? So there has to be a deliberate effort to flatten your curve, to sunbathe and with a margarita once in a while, right? Because because if you and I go to the gym and we lift and we bench press, 4 times a day every day, right? Our muscles aren't going to grow; they'll fall into entropy, right? We'll destroy ourselves. So challenge yourself, stretch your comfort zones, explore your edges, and once you've gone through that, take a moment to recover, learn, grow, reflect, and then pick the next edge.
I have a lot of people who listen, myself included, who fall into that hyperachiever category of go, 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 and this habit of attaching worth to what we do. And I have a really hard time just resting and preparing for that next peak. So reading your book was it was exactly what I needed. I literally sat and read it in one sitting, and I get to go back through and reread and actually absorb it, because I was just going through, like, this is like the cheap book to life right now. It was awesome, man. So speaking of the book, where did the idea come from to write this? I know you mentioned the difference between attributes and skills, but where did this idea come from to base performance more on people's attributes rather than their skills?
Well, so it was about 10 or 12 years into my career, and I was running assessment, selection, and training for one of our specialized SEAL commands. And at this particular command, what would happen is we'd take already experienced spec ops guys and bring them to our selection process and put them through our own 9-month selection process. And we get about a 50% attrition rate. So about 50% of the guys weren't making it through. We, at the time, didn't have a good way to explain that. Okay, the only way we were explaining was, well, this guy couldn't shoot very well, or he couldn't do this very well, and all the explanations were very skills focused, and that wasn't satisfactory to us, because to us, to the leadership, or to the individual, right? Because these guys were experienced dudes, right? They had done all this stuff before. And so we're falling short. So I came in, and I know my CO had said, hey, I want you to look at articulating this, trying to articulate what we're doing here. And that's when I started looking at attributes instead of skills, right? And they're inherently different things, okay? Skills, I haven't gone through this, right? Okay,
I was about to say, what's the difference between attribute and skill?
I do this so much, I don't want to make sure I'm not...
No, you're fine, man.
So they're inherently different skills. So we are not born with the ability to ride a bike or shoot a gun or throw a ball or anything like that. Okay, we're taught that. We're trained to do that, right? And skills direct our behavior in known environments, known and specific environments. Okay, this is how and when to ride a bike. This is how and when to shoot a gun. This is how and when to drive a car. Because they're specific, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see how well someone does any one of those things, okay? What skills don't tell us, though, is how we show up in stress, challenge, and uncertainty. Because when the environment becomes uncertain and unknown, it's very difficult to apply a known skill to an unknown environment, okay?
Yes, this is where I loved that differentiation in the book. Sorry to interrupt, but you said that, and I was just like, oh, skills are for known, like attributes are more for the unknown. I loved
right,
that.
Yeah, because this is where we lean on these attributes, these innate qualities. Attributes are innate, okay? We're all born with levels of adaptability, resilience, patience, situational awareness, right? They inform our behavior rather than dictate or direct our behavior, right? So in other words, our levels, or my son's levels of perseverance and resilience, informed the way he showed up when he was learning how to ride a bike for the first time, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. And because they're hidden in the background, they're hard to see, they're very difficult to assess, measure, and test. You can't sit across someone on an interview process, right, and assess how resilient they are or how adaptable they are. They are the most visible and visceral during times of challenge, uncertainty, and stress, which is what made this laboratory I had with SEAL training so beautiful, because SEAL training is all about throwing people.
I was about to say, it's like you had the perfect lab to experiment with this. Like, you're subjecting men to the most mentally, physically, emotionally draining week in training of their life.
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
I mean, you mentioned in the book, you can't take a group of accountants and be like, okay, how courageous are they? How adaptable, resilient? Like, okay, we're going to go to the gym for 12 hours. Like that wouldn't be.
It wouldn't be contextual, right?
No.
And so, but what it did say, what it did tell me, and what we get to look at was, okay, we need to, as we're going through this training. And again, the training we were running was different than Bud's training. But as we're putting guys through this training, instead of, and we don't need to change the training, but instead of focusing on how well they're conducting the skill, let's see how their attributes are showing up, okay? And that allowed us to better explain performance in a way that was palatable for us, for the candidate, for the leadership. Well, coming out of the Navy, I started working in leadership space and high-performing teams. I'd give talks, and oftentimes I'd get asked by people and organizations, "Hey, Rich, we created this dream team, high performers, best graphics designer, best salesperson, best lawyer, whatever it is, and it was great, and it was working great for the first few days or weeks, but then things started to go south and sideways, right? And the team fell apart, became toxic. What happens? What happens with these dream teams?" And I said, because you're selecting based on the wrong things. Dream teams fall under the trap oftentimes of selecting based on skill. Best this, best that, but so he was a behavior. I gotta get his title right, because he was a systems analyst and behaviorist, and he worked with organizations. I'll get it right, but I mentioned in the book, his name was Russell Akoff, and he's deceased now. But Russell Akoff used to talk about the systems and how they behaved in the context of businesses. And he used to say, hey, if you took the best parts of every best automobile out there, right? So say the BMW has the best steering column, and the Jeep has the best frame, and the Jaguar has the best engine, okay, you name it. Take all the best parts from all the best vehicles, and you mash them together. would you have the best vehicle on the planet? Right? And the answer is no. You wouldn't have it. You wouldn't even have a vehicle, okay? Because the parts wouldn't fit together. And he says he used to say a system is never the sum of its parts. It's a product of their interaction. Okay, this is attributes versus skills. Okay, attributes are what cause us to interact, especially among teams and humans, because human interaction is inherently complex, which means it's dynamic, it's unpredictable, and and it's uncertain, and that's where attributes fall in. So even in team building, it's really important to understand that, hey, while skills are necessary, I mean, obviously, I can't use someone who's great at graphics design in a gunfight. Okay.
Yeah.
So skills matter to a certain extent, but attributes need to be looked at as well, because things are never, or I say rarely, going to go as planned. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you need a team that can adapt and mold and shape and be able to affect that stuff. So you need to start thinking about attributes.
Definitely. When I was reading that chapter on the dream team, I had an aha moment that I hadn't connected the dots, because it took me back to high school. I ran track in high school and was part of some relays. And in my senior year, we had the dream team. On paper, the four of us combined, we had the fastest 100-meter time. So obviously, we'd all be the best fit for the relay. But there was one individual who just had a terrible attitude, and the chemistry was off, and he was just always grumbling. We'd walk up to the starting line and be like, who's going to mess up this time? We're probably going to lose, right? And just like, why would you do that? And we ended up cutting him from the team, even though on paper he was the best fit, and subbed in someone else who is not quite as skillful, but had the attributes. Like, guys, I'm so excited. Let's do this. And we won like every single race after that. And it was the difference between the dream team based on skills versus attributes. So reading that was just this light bulb moment where I didn't even realize, we were basing it on skills rather than the attributes. So I loved that chapter. It really resonated with me. Definitely
it's really true, because that's how we show up amongst other human beings. Now, you got lucky because sports is probably the one area that you can get away with that more often, get away with skills more often than not. However, even the best coaches of any athletic team will say, hey, listen, I can have all the best players, but if they can't get along and work as a team, then we're not winning anything, right? So it is important, and getting along, human behavior is inherently unpredictable.
It is. Speaking of unpredictable, you talk, and I loved this chapter because as I was reading it, my phone kept buzzing and I kept getting distracted. You talked about how great are humans at multitasking. What are your thoughts on this? Because I was in the middle of reading and I literally had to go set my phone in the other room, because even though I wasn't checking it, just the buzz, like my phone right now is in my room, silent. So if it rings, if it buzzes, how important is it to limit your distractions, and how good are we at multitasking?
Yeah, well, we're not, because we don't. Now, again, I have a few neuroscientist friends, and when you get into the neuroscience of it, technically we focus on one thing. There's a way we can actually focus on one other thing. Usually, we can kind of focus on one or two, but our primary focus is always going to be on one thing, and that's it, right? And so what we do, in fact, this idea that we can do a bunch of things at once is actually, in fact, a myth. Now, people will say, well, that's not true, because I can listen to a podcast while driving. I mean, that's easy, and I can process what they're saying. I'm paying attention to the podcast, and I perfectly agree, but it doesn't count when you've relegated the tasks to your unconscious. Okay. Ooh. You're able to do that because you are driving without thinking about it. Okay. I guarantee you, if you're listening to that podcast and suddenly a car swerves in front of you and you have to swerve out of the way or skid or whatever, you will have to rewind the last 15 seconds of that podcast, because you will have missed it. Okay. Because your focus just switched. Your focus just switched. You just task switch. So we, as human beings, task switch all the time in between categories and context. Okay. A category, so a category would be say driving. A context would be like my car. Like inside that kind of environment, I'm task switching between steering and braking and shifting. If I'm, those are small task switch. Then I park the car in the parking lot, and I just got out of the car. Now I've switched contexts. Right now I'm in the parking lot. Okay. Then I walk into the supermarket and I'm in a whole new context. So our brains are constantly swapping all the time. Where we have to, and some people are much better at this, by the way, than others. So some people actually can shift focus from one thing. They can be writing an email, right, and then the phone will ring, and they can go to a phone call, have a very cogent conversation, right, hang up that, and go straight back to that email, right. They're very good.
How do we get better at that then?
Well, it doesn't. The question is, do you need to be better at it? I mean, some people. So there are some people, like my wife and a buddy of mine who's a neuroscientist, Andrew Huberman. He's a self-admitted bad task switcher, right? Both of them are people who can focus deeply. When they focus in on something, it's very difficult for them to pull out on anything, right?
Laser.
They're laser. That is really, really beneficial when you're a scientist. Or my wife does project. When she dives into something, she's just remarkable at getting stuff done. Okay, better than me because I'll get distracted sometimes, right? So just because you're able to switch rapidly doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing. A balance is always good. It's really kind of figuring out where you are, where you stand on the scale, and then working with that. The problem that we all face is oftentimes, like you mentioned in the question, we do it to ourselves deliberately and too often. For no reason. Okay, our mobile phones are a collection of contexts, right? I mean, we have the Instagram, we have the email, we have the text, we have the whatever, the beep, buzz, or whiz bang that goes on, right? And as soon as if we have that if you and I are having a conversation, I have that right here. As soon as that beeps, okay, even if I don't break my conversation with you, my brain has, okay, because my brain has heard that, right? And sometimes it can be as neurologically taxing as going from a library to a soccer field. Okay, every time our brain switches, it takes energy. Okay, so those of us who do this too often will find ourselves exhausted and won't necessarily know why. And an example could be this. When we all got quarantined, okay, most of us were thrown into an environment at home where we had to merge a bunch of different categories and contexts, right? So me, I'm now at home, I'm writing the book. So I'm going from writing the book to now helping my son with algebra, to helping, cook, make dinner, to walking the dog, to back to the book, right?
Nope.
A lot, and a lot of us probably found ourselves exhausted. And we're like, how am I so tired? I haven't done anything. Well, no, our brain was actually working pretty hard the whole time. Okay.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I know a lot of my good friends, they beat themselves up. Like, I'm at home, I'm not really working as much, but I'm exhausted and just fatigued. And so now there's like a neurological explanation of your brain's trying to task switch between 100 different contexts. Like, of course you're going to be exhausted. Your home just became your office, became your children's school, became your school, became your studying, became where the friends are. It's everything. This dining room table that I'm at shifted from where I eat dinner to, okay, now where I'm going to work, where I'm going to send emails, where I'm going to record podcasts, where I'm going to do this, that, all of it just condensed into one area. So I love that you gave that neurological explanation. So people out there listening, watching, give yourself some grace. It's okay. Totally. We were all flipped on our head last year and still trying to figure that out this year.
And our brains they only operate on what's equivalent to about 40 watts of power, right? So, and in fact, that's probably one of our most energy expending organs is our brain, right? And so, when we're constantly, so a great example of this also is like if you go to anybody who's vacationed and gone to a new city or a foreign city, okay, and is dropped in there and just suddenly trying to figure stuff out, or if you go to New York and you're not used to riding the subway, okay, and you're figuring that out, you are exhausted after that, even though you haven't necessarily maybe moved around that much because your brain is just working really hard. So the idea is in task switching to figure out where you are, where your competencies lie in terms of that attribute. Because neither, too far in either direction is probably bad, right? Somewhere in the middle is probably good. But then try to more deliberately not throw your brain into task switching when it doesn't need to be.
So I'm not really sure how to phrase this, but I know people's attention spans have started slowly getting littler and littler. You watch a cartoon now compared to 50 years ago, and it's switching frames every 2 seconds compared to every 10 to 15 seconds. So do you think that plays any role with our inability as well to not task switch effectively, or do you think it maybe enhances our ability to task switch?
Well, I'm not a neuroscientist, so we probably have to save that one for the neuroscientists in terms of the scientific detail. I would assume that it does a little bit of both, right? I mean, I look at my boys who are now teenagers, and their ability to kind of manage in these video games, these first person games where they're running around. I mean, I played with them on some of them, and they just they kick my ass on their ability to kind of switch and do their buttons and kind of look here.
Yep.
And so their brains are used to moving in a way that my brain has never been, now if I played the game for a while, certainly I could probably get up to a certain level of that. But I think, I do think it's changing the wiring a little bit, and in some cases that's for good, right? Because our world is going to constantly move faster. It's interesting. I read an article, must have been years ago, about the first automobile that was ever invented.
Okay.
All right. And what's interesting is when the first guy was driving the first car, it was extraordinarily difficult for him to drive it. Like he was crashing all the time. Like he couldn't figure out the whole steering wheel thing and steering the car and all that stuff. That process was completely foreign to the human brain at that moment,
yeah.
right? And that car was maybe going 2 miles an hour, maybe, right?
That's funny to think about. Yeah.
Think about that now. I mean, we without thinking about it now go 70 miles an hour on the highway as 16-year-old kids, and sometimes irresponsibly even faster, right? Our brains are wired to move faster in ways. If we were to transport someone from that time frame into a vehicle today, they would be almost instantly overwhelmed with the speed at which the world was moving, because their brains aren't used to that. So our brains are plastic enough to get there. But I would imagine, we'd have to check in with a neuroscientist on this, but I would imagine that we've experienced a definite moving of the needle in that direction.
Another question that I wanted to get to, and I know in the book you talk about how attributes aren't necessarily better than others or worse than others. And I think one thing that I want to commend you on is your ability, and the podcast started off this way with syntax and semantics of let's break down what a word actually means. And I think you did that expertly. So with that said, when you were assessing the seals, were there any attributes that if they were in really high quantities, you'd be like, okay, I'm glad to see that, or too low? Or if there was one that was high, you're like, oh crap, that's a bit concerning. Were there any others that were weighted heavier or lighter than?
There always are, and the reason is because every niche or job or team is going to have a list of attributes that are required for that team. So, for example, the list of attributes required to be a Navy SEAL, to be a good Navy SEAL, is different than the list of attributes required to be a good teacher or be a good salesperson. So, this is where we begin to be able to place value on attributes. Okay, we don't place value or judgment on attributes in terms of how we internally show up, or our levels of each, right? Because that's like judging our hair color. There's nothing we can do about it. Might as well not judge it. We can place value on it in terms of how they show up for specific teams, right? Empathy for a SEAL is not. You don't have to have a lot. You need to have some, because you're dealing with people, and you don't. If people with low empathy, SEALs with low empathy are dangerous, right? But you don't have to have a lot. If you want to be a nurse, for example, the empathy is going to be higher on the list. The requirement is going to be higher for empathy as a nurse. I would say even for a police officer, empathy should be higher on that list. Okay, and so you can see how they're weighted differently. A stand-up comic, I love using them as an example, right? Stand-up comic doesn't need a lot of empathy to be a stand-up comic. In fact, too much empathy would hurt them in their profession, right? Because how can you find funny at a funeral if you're too empathetic, right? So
they're making fun of people for a living, essentially.
Yes,
they have to care about
dial
feelings.
Down. That's right. They have to dial down, right? And so it's going to depend on the profession as to what the value of each attribute is. It's incumbent on each team or profession, if they're interested in doing the work, to figure out, okay, what's the list of attributes that's required for this specific team? What does that look like? And then they can begin to assess and evaluate for those specific attributes.
I love that you break it down, that it's contextual, that what serves you in one situation might not serve you in the other, and you need to be you need to be able to adapt. You have to have high levels of adaptability. So I have just a couple questions. I want to respect your time, and this one, it's really easy for someone like me or for my listeners and viewers to look at someone who's had a successful career as a Navy SEAL, who's done some pretty badass things. We tend to see the highlight reels. So what would you say is one of your biggest failures professionally?
Oh gosh. I could, I don't know if I could, it'd be tough to point to a specific situation. I would say as a leader, one of the things that I had to learn, and in some cases the hard way, was that people judge you. And I've heard, I can't remember who said this, so I'm going to say it's an unknown quote. But anyway, people judge us on our behaviors while we judge ourselves on our intent. Okay. So if you're in a position of leadership, you must make sure that your intent is explicit and transparent, and your behaviors are aligned with that. Okay, because if your behaviors aren't necessarily aligned or seemingly aligned with your intent, people are going to judge you by your behaviors, and you're like, wait a second, I did this. Kind of the old adage: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's because we intend, we judge ourselves on intent. Well, this is what I was trying to do in my mind, right? But sometimes you have to, especially in a position of leadership, in a position of visibility, you need to make sure that your behaviors are aligned completely with your intent, because that's all other people see. I think that's a huge lesson that I learned, in some cases the hard way, but certainly anybody who's behaving around anybody else should know, but certainly anybody in a leadership position.
I love that answer. I have nothing to add to that. I was thinking, could I add anything? No, why would I? So another one is, confidence seems to be in pretty high demand, but a lot of people are very insecure and don't have higher levels of confidence. What would you say to someone if they ran into you and went, Rich, I want to develop my confidence specifically. What should I do to increase my confidence?
Yeah. So I would define confidence as one's understanding and comfort in the fact that regardless of the environment, whether it's great or how much it deteriorates, you will perform. You'll be okay. The ability to optimally perform in any environment. Okay. I would say, people say, hey, what's the biggest thing you come out of with when you finish SEAL training? And I would say it's confidence. It's because you come out of that knowing, hey, no matter how much the environment deteriorates around me, I know I will be able to perform through it. I'm confident in that, right? That's true confidence. And so I'd say for people who find themselves low on confidence, it should have nothing to do with how they think they physically look or how they think they compare to others or any of that. It should be, how do you feel you show up when times are uncertain and challenging? And even if you're able just to take step by step, you should be comfortable in that confidence. And again, confidence is really, really powerful, and it's different than arrogance. Okay, and so confidence is internally focused. It's this idea that I know I can do this, right? Whereas arrogance is I'm better than you, right? It's arrogance. Confidence is internally expressed. Arrogance is externally expressed, right? And so there's a difference there. And we know that arrogance almost always is a sign of a lack of confidence somewhere, right? So,
Yep.
So arrogance is usually a great marker and beacon that shows someone that person is lacks self-confidence, lacks self-esteem in something. They're insecure about something. So confidence should be security in one's ability to just perform, to optimally perform.
Yeah. And I love that you said it kind of begins with just the awareness of where am I confident? Am I doing anything in my life to gain confidence? Because I think that's a big thing is a lot of people are comfortable, myself included. And when I'm comfortable, I'm ironically not confident, because I get confident by, let me set a goal, even if it's something simple, and then meet that. Let me set another one. So I get confidence by being subjected to uncertain, complicated, complex situations than coming out the other side. And if
Right.
all you do is go to your 9-to-5 job, come home and watch Netflix for 6 hours, you're comfortable, you're proficient at your job, and you're not experiencing anything new. So
I'm pushing. However, I will say this. I would imagine every single human being can look at a certain point in their lives. I would say anybody who's over, 16, but anybody can look back and say, and look and find times that were challenging, were tough, were rough, and they were able to get through it. Okay, that should develop confidence. That should help you say, hey, I got through that, I performed. And a further analysis of how you performed in terms of your attributes and what you brought to the table will further allow you some introspection and some insight on yourself, which will also bolster your confidence as well. Because the more you know your own engine, the more confident you are that you know what to expect when the engine starts getting into uncertain territory.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember which attribute it was, but it was being aware of both your strengths and your weaknesses and not downplaying it. I think was that humility.
Humility, yeah, and it's this idea, understanding both, because that's really, especially in humility is one of the attributes for team ability, is how you perform with other people on a team, and that's the key to any high performing team, is that you are vulnerable, you are transparent about your strengths and your weaknesses, because then my teammate knows exactly when they can lean on me, because they can see my strengths, and they know exactly when I'm going to be leaning on them, because they can see my weaknesses. That's the key, right? And that's humility and vulnerability.
Just being able to be not comfortable who you are, but own who you are. And
right.
Because I've at times downplayed my successes, and I've also overplayed my successes, and just that awareness. I enjoyed that chapter as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question. This podcast is obviously called Compounding Happiness. So I wanted to end by asking, what's one thing that you do every single day to create intentional happiness in your life? And what does happiness mean to you?
Yes. I would say gratitude. If you just asking the question, what am I grateful for, and taking some time with that question, letting it sit and marinate and answer, and letting the answers bubble up, will generate happiness. Guaranteed. Because we all have so much to be grateful for. And happiness is well-being, happiness is love and connection and bonding, but happiness is different for every single human being, mm-hmm. and so if you ask yourself the question, what am I grateful for, you will begin to come up with answers that are the things that make you happy. And that's what I try to do every day. I can't say I'm diligent about it, but if I'm in a bad mood, or if I'm depressed about something, I will ask myself that question.
Mm-hmm. Rich, this has been fun, man. I just looked at the time and I was like, this hour flew by. I've greatly enjoyed this. So where can we get connected to you? Where can we get your book? What are next steps in your life? Where can we find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I definitely go to theattributes.com. That's the website. And from there, you can actually get everything. The books, you can get the book there. You can take the assessment tool. There's a free assessment where you can see where you stand on the grit and the mental acuity and the drive attributes. We're working on the leadership and team ability assessments right now. Cool. Have some workbooks on there that people can grab if they want to develop attributes, and of course you can get. I'm on Instagram. There's links to my Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. So website's the best place to go. Theattributes.com, and but happy if anybody wanted to stop by.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll go ahead and link that in the show notes, guys. Rich, thanks, man. This has been a ton of fun, and I wish you luck in your next endeavors and adventures. And again, man, thank you for your service, for your time. This has been awesome for me, and I hope it's been fun for you as well.
It has, Jeremy. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation. And
of course. All right. Yes, as well. All right. Have a good one.